Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Please watch our YouTube channel, like and go to Gracefully Graying, our community at gracefullygraying.com. And today on Gracefully Graying, I'm pleased to welcome as my guest, Jacqueline Cooper, who is going to be discussing an important issue. And in fact, in preparing the show and talking about it, I was thinking about the fact that over my many years, I've known of a lot of people who committed suicide or who had friends or relatives who committed suicide. And it's probably one of the greatest human tragedies, not only because of the loss of a life, but because of the impact on those who are left behind. So without further ado, let me introduce Jacqueline Cooper to Gracefully Graying. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thanks, Henry, for having me. I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to talk about this very important topic.
It's a very important topic. First of all, tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and your background.
Sure. So I spent most of my career in healthcare technology, IT. So I led teams who implemented electronic health records. First of all, starting here in Madison at the University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinics. And then once I had that experience, I went out and did consulting with places like UCLA, University of Washington. And then a few years ago, my husband and I relocated to overseas to Dubai. And I had an opportunity to implement with a team at Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi, which was quite an amazing experience. And then some things happened in my personal life, and I decided to pursue a certification in life coaching. And so I took a year-long course at the University of Wisconsin here and got a coaching certificate. And then I went on after that to get a certification in grief coaching. So I work with a lot of different types of people doing just general life coaching, but my main interest is working with people who have lost a loved one to suicide and that grieving process.
Let's talk about that. First of all, Jacqueline, how preventable is suicide?
Well, it is preventable. There are a lot of a large number of people that depression is the main. About 90% of people are depressed, and that is what pushes them to suicide. But their studies have shown that 80 to 90% of people that get treated for depression they are fine. They just need to be able to have that recognition. But there is such a stigma, and a lot of times people just don't understand what they're going through, what they're feeling, why they're feeling the way that they are. So they try to hide it, and so they don't get the help that they need.
Has COVID, which we're now, it's almost a full year since COVID first hit, has this impacted upon suicide?
So the numbers for the last year are not in yet. I anticipate that those numbers will be quite large compared to prior years. And one of the things that is very concerning is that the age group of people that are committing suicide is now much younger. I've had several people reach out to me this year about someone who took their own life, and it's usually a friend that is calling me to say, hey, a relative took their own life. What kind of resources would you recommend? And every single one of those this year have been between the age of 20 and 25. And now I just saw something last week that Las Vegas schools they're now wanting to come back live because of the fact that from March to December, 18 students took their lives. The youngest one of those was just 9 years old. And
it really is. Tell us about the risk factors regarding suicide.
Yeah. So mental health issues are the number one reasons that people commit suicide. It's depression, sleep disturbances, mood disorders, schizophrenia, anxiety, personality disorders. Drugs and alcohol and other substance abuse also plays a large role. Hopelessness, impulsive and aggressive tendencies, history of trauma or abuse in someone's life when they were younger, major physical illnesses. Someone gets, really ill and they're just not sure how to handle that. They don't want to live through that whole process of dying at that slow death, previous suicide attempts, a family history of suicide. Someone loses a job and financially is struggling. There's a lot of loneliness or a loss of significant relationship, and people struggle handling being alone. Easy access to legal weapons, lack of social support and a sense of isolation, stigma associated with asking for help. We talked about this a little earlier. People are afraid to ask for help. And interestingly, people view that would be a weak thing to do, but really, reality, it just shows the strength that someone has to be able to have the courage to reach out and ask for help. And the inability to recognize and properly handle grief in our own lives influences our own depression. And it's really important to speak openly with people who you think might be contemplating suicide. And when doing so, be specific with them. Ask them directly, are you thinking of harming yourself? People want someone to ask them. They're afraid to say it themselves.
Jacqueline, tell us about some of the risk factors regarding suicide.
So risk factors we just covered. So
what about warning signs?
Yeah, warning signs. So there's a lot of warning signs, what I would hope for, if I could wish anything, is that people would know these warning signs and would pay attention to them. So if someone starts talking about wanting to die or to kill themselves, or if they're looking for a way to kill themselves, like searching online or buying a weapon, a gun, talking about feeling hopeless or having no reason to live, talking about feeling trapped, or if they are showing signs that they're in unbearable pain, talking about being a burden to others and saying that they have no reason to go on living. If you see someone increasing the use of drugs and alcohol, acting anxious and agitated or behaving recklessly, withdrawing or isolating from family and friends and showing a lack of interest in future plans, saying goodbye to family and friends, this happens, making a will or giving away prized possessions. A lot of times people will give away something that's really important to them because then they think, then when I'm gone, they'll realize that I cared that much for them. Showing rage or talking about seeking revenge. You see extreme mood swings. And, just noticing these behaviors, especially if the behavior is new or out of character for someone, or if you notice that it's increased or it seems that it's related to a painful event or a loss or a change in someone's life, these are all good indicators that someone needs help. And this is the time to ask the questions.
I'm thinking now during these past year, with so much isolation, it's got to have a negative impact. And I know the figures aren't out, but my guess is the figures are going to be very, very high.
Yeah, I think so too. And, it takes a while for whatever reason. The CDC and the World Health Organization, both of those organizations who I have a good amount of trust in, they collect these numbers, but for whatever reason, it takes them a while. And then the other thing with suicide is a lot of suicides aren't identified as suicide for a variety of reasons. It can't be proven. And so I think that the numbers that are even reported from those organizations aren't as high as they probably really are.
Jacqueline, what are some protective factors for preventing suicide?
Yeah, really good question. So to date, the protective factors haven't really been studied as extensively as the risk factors. However, it does appear that there are positive steps that are being made as awareness increases. And research that has been recently done is showing that by limiting access to methods of killing dramatically decreases suicide rates. So restricting access to means of self-harm. So things like carbon monoxide emission controls, shutoffs, limiting access to lethal weapons, gun storage safety. And then this one I was actually really happy to hear about. There are now identifying some of the bridges. So like the San Francisco Bridge is a place where way too many people jump and take their life. And unfortunately, a lot of times there are rescue workers there that save that person, but then their life going forward is not what they would want ever, because of the harm that they do to themselves by making that huge leap on that bridge. But about 2 years ago, they started building a barrier in the San Francisco Bridge. And then because of COVID, it was supposed to be done January, just like this last month, January of 2021. And now it's been put off. It was delayed because of COVID. So it's supposed to be fully up and ready like the 2023, January of 2023. So a little bit of a delay. And they're also identifying other bridges to do this work on. So then another area that I think we could do a lot more is enhancing our availability of mental health to people. We saw this happen with substance abuse. It's for, many years ago, it wasn't identified as a medical issue when someone had a substance abuse. And now those types of services are much more available. And I think we're going to see that with mental health over the coming years too. And I think a lot of it is just because of this awareness that people are now seeing, and more people are being impacted. So people are speaking up. And there are a lot of people that are making this their mission they lost a loved one to suicide. So I lost my father when I was 22 years old to suicide. And I think that's why this is really near and dear to my heart. And so I think that's happening to other people.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's a personal one. Do you know why it happened?
My father?
Yes.
My father was depressed for probably most of his life, and we didn't know it. He was one of these kind of people that didn't show his sadness, but you would sometimes see it come through, and he was very emotional. He also had a substance abuse issue, and then my parents divorced, and I think that he was just lonely and sad. And I remember the night the 4 or 5 days before it happened, I was with him and my family, and my sister was graduating from her high school. And we were all at this event, and I was sitting between my mother and my father. And my father was very emotional. He got teary-eyed. And I remember when he walked me to my car that night, he gave me this hug, and it was like this awkward hug. You know how when someone holds you like too long?
Sure.
And I felt like it was really strange, but I just I had no idea that he was in that much pain. And I think the thing with suicide that people that haven't experienced it, what they don't understand is, I like to call it complicated grief, and there's a different way that people look at complicated grief too. But for me, there are so many emotions, especially back then, that was several years back. But there's not only like the sadness and the loss of missing that person, but there's this anger, and there's like, why would you not talk to me? Like, why would you not ask for help? Why? And then there's this really deep, intense sadness of, oh my gosh, like he was in that much pain that he thought that was the only way out. And then there's embarrassment. Like, how do I tell people that my father took his own life? Does that look bad on our family? There's just these feelings are just so complicated. And it's, everyone that goes through grief and loses a loved one goes through some of this, but I just find that suicide is just, it takes a different avenue.
I'm thinking out loud, and the fact is that years ago, a lot of mental health facilities were closed down, and there was a shift away from it and a shift towards really warehousing people with mental health problems in jails. And now maybe that's starting to change again, and a recognition of the need for more mental health awareness and more of a willingness to seek treatment.
Yeah.
So that goes to the next question, Jacqueline. How can we help someone who may be at risk?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think we're going to see is introducing advanced screening in emergency departments and screening by physicians and asking about risk factors and about suicide thoughts and about availability of guns in the home. That is an area that is being worked on right now. There are discussions that are happening. I anticipate that we'll see some of those things being implemented over the next several years. These things take time. But the main thing that I would say is that take your loved ones serious. Know and watch for the warning signs and be direct with them. If you see something strange, ask them, are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about taking your own life? Many times people are scared to talk about it, people that are thinking about suicide, and they really just want someone to start that conversation. There's also things like there's a National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and that is available 24/7, and it's free and it's confidential, and they're there. That's what they're there for. If someone's in immediate harm, 911 is the thing to do, and take them to the nearest emergency room. Listen with empathy and provide support and encouragement. Acknowledge that their feelings are legitimate. And like I said, learn the warning signs and don't leave someone alone. Stay with them. Tell them that help is available and that this can be something that they can work on. Treatment is available. If they are, like I mentioned, don't leave them alone. Offer to help them find a healthcare provider if they're not sure what to do. A lot of times they're foggy and they don't, they're just in this really dark place. Make a phone call for them or go with them to their appointment. Just, stay with them, guide them to where they need to go.
Jacqueline, what about myths regarding suicide?
Yeah, there are a few kind of key myths that I can think of. Sometimes people say that if you ask someone, they think that if you ask someone if they're thinking about taking their own life, that'll put the idea into their head. And that's not really true. A lot of times people that are suicidal, they want to start the conversation. They beg, they plead in themselves someone to raise the question. Next one is attempting suicide is a cry for attention. That's just simply not true. There's another one is that people that attempt suicide are only thinking of themselves. And also that once someone is suicidal, that they will always remain suicidal. And that's not true. There are a lot of people that attempt suicide and then never do it again. Another one is that people who are suicidal show obvious signs of struggling, and that's really not true. And I wanted to just mention to you, Henry, that Brain Shape is someone that I think you all work with. And I signed up for a subscription to the podcast, and I got an email actually just this week from them, and it was listing the top 10 podcasts over the last year. And this podcast the first one I clicked on and listened to, it was Dr. Margaret Rutherford. And she wrote a book about perfectly hidden depression. And why this is interesting is that, where I said, people that are suicidal will show obvious signs of struggle. That's just not true. There are so many people that suffer in silence every single day that you would meet on the street and see people even in your own family that are really struggling with depression, and they don't show it. They come across as being, these really highly functional people, very successful. And then all of a sudden they take their own life and you're like, wait, how could that possibly happen? How could this person do that? But what she offers in her book, and I haven't read the book and I haven't even seen it, I just heard about this, but she offers a journaling. I am a huge fan of journaling because I think putting your feelings on paper really helps you kind of sort them out, kind of like how therapy or coaching helps you sort them out. So Dr. Margaret Rutherford, Perfectly Hidden Depression.
What are some other reasons regarding suicide that you may not have mentioned before?
Just a couple of other things for people to know. People that commit suicide, they don't really want to injure themselves. They just want their pain to end, and they get to a place where they just don't know what to do. And this is the avenue that they choose. Suicide can happen any time of year. A lot of times people think it's associated with just holidays, but it really can happen any time of the year. Suicide is definitely on the rise in the United States. And thoughts of suicide are not uncommon. This number statistic that I recently learned of, 11.8% of adults between the ages of 18 and 25 have seriously thought about suicide. 11.8%. I was shocked at that number. And there are treatments that can help those that are suffering from these suicidal thoughts. We have to make it more available.
What are some of the treatments? How can we prevent suicide?
So doctors and scientists are working on this really hard right now. This is an area that we need to address as a national health crisis right now. And I think people are finally recognizing that. And, currently there are barriers to accessing treatment, especially mental health treatment, as we talked about earlier. Research has indicated that restricting some of these self-harm opportunities for people definitely improves the ability to prevent suicide. So I think that's what we're going to be seeing, some of the things that we talked about earlier, keeping guns away from people, or making sure that someone that's is depressed doesn't have access to a gun, and some of the things that we talked about with bridges. And then the healthcare system really needs to up their game, I think.
Jacqueline, what about those who are gracefully graying? And I'm talking about those, 50, 60, 70s. What about suicides in those age range? I know you've talked about the fact that it's becoming more and more prevalent among teenagers and young adults, but what about our dynamics?
Yeah. So this is an age group where you're experiencing, for a lot of people, it's loneliness. And a lot of times it's because of a loss of a spouse. People are alone and they don't have that connection that they maybe did while their spouse was here, while their children were there. One of the things, keeping an eye on your family and friends, especially now during COVID. This is a time to, be reaching out to people. One other thing that I would say, and I haven't experienced this yet because I haven't officially retired yet. I'm working towards that, but for people that are planning on retiring, a lot of times they look at only the financial aspect of retirement, and there's a whole nother social aspect to retirement. A lot of times I think people think, starting tomorrow, I don't have to get out of bed at a certain time of day, and nobody's going to set my agenda. I can set my own agenda. But if you don't take the time to really plan what that looks like, all of a sudden you're waking up and you don't know who you are, what your purpose is anymore. And there's a book that I would recommend called Unlock the Secrets of Retirement. It's by a gentleman named Galen Metz, and it's how to plan and achieve a fulfilling life in retirement. And this book is good because it offers those journaling aspects where he encourages you to brainstorm about all of these various things that are important to you and helps you develop a roadmap of what your retirement is going to look like. And I think if people can stay active, get involved, stay connected, those are the kind of the main key things for the older generation.
I think you have a purpose. I mean, the key is you have to have a purpose. I mean, if you want to retire, do so, but don't just stop. I mean, right. You've got to stay active mentally, physically. So these are all important. Now you're a life coach and you're specializing in grief counseling and also looking at issues with regard to suicide. Tell us about your coaching.
Yeah. I like to say that grief coaching wasn't something that I chose, that it chose me. And when I decided to do my life coaching certification, it was during a kind of a dark period. We lost within an 8-month period, we lost a 5-week-old grandson, and then 8 months later, a 34-year-old niece who died of an accidental overdose. So it was during these times that I just decided that I wasn't living my purpose. While I was successful in my career in healthcare IT, it just wasn't the thing that I would choose to do when I woke up in the morning. And so I went down this path of doing the life coach. And then when they encourage you to pick a niche. And so it was it was natural to me to pick this grief process, because when we lost the 5-week-old grandson, just knowing that there were other people that had experienced this before. I sometimes feel like in life, that's why it's supposed to be like this, because when people experience grief, they are then there to teach the ones that come after them and to help them know that you're not alone and you can do this. And so through my practice, one of the things that I hear a lot from the people that I work with is that the people in their life are sick of hearing about their sadness. They think that, everyone thinks that grief has a timeline, and it really doesn't. Everyone grieves differently, and everyone's timeline is different. And some people might be feeling better and getting back on with their life in 6 months. Some it might take 5 years. Each person is different. And so what I do for these clients, they usually come to me sometime long after the event, because I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach. So a lot of times they're reaching out and seeking therapist assistance shortly after the death or the suicide or whatever it is. And then they show up to me about a year or two later when they just can't figure out how to get unstuck. Why can't I just get back to this happiness that I had before? I just feel like I'm just in this place that I'm stuck. So I just allow them the space to show up wherever they are and share whatever's on their heart. I provide information to them if it's what they need. I provide resource recommendations. And then eventually, once the client is ready, I offer a positive intelligence program, which helps them just move forward with a new mindset. We also explore core values and the importance of understanding what your core values are. A lot of times people don't realize that if they're making a decision and it doesn't feel right, it's probably because it goes against the grain of one of their core values. And a lot of people don't know what their core values are. So this is something that I feel is really important for people to understand. We talk about strengths. We do some exercises around life purpose, so they get a better sense of what they feel their life purpose is. And then we identify goals, and I help hold them accountable to meeting those goals. Coaching is really about asking those powerful questions to allow the client to create new awareness, and then helping them figure out how to incorporate that into their own lives.
So you're helping people open new doorways to a next chapter of their lives. We're running out of time. What are some final thoughts before we sign off?
I would just say that if you know of someone that if you have someone that you've lost, just understand that it's really important to know that everyone grieves differently and in their own timeline, and it takes time, and they should allow themselves the time and the space to heal. Reading really helps a lot, understanding what their feelings are and that it's normal that they feel the way that they do and that they are not alone and they will get through it. Self-care is really important. One of the things that I find really valuable is mindfulness. And my new favorite app is called Healthy Minds. It's an app that was developed by the University of Wisconsin. It's free and it's really good. And the thing that I like about this app is that it talks about how mindfulness impacts you in a physical way and how it affects your brain. And talk to people that have experienced it. Don't be afraid.
Share. Jacqueline Cooper, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. And again, I ask all of you to watch Jacqueline Cooper on our YouTube channel, as well as our other YouTube videos. And please share and like Gracefully Graying. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, Henry. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you.